Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. Thanks, Nicole. So a group of us met this morning and sort of rehashed a lot of the issues that we had been hearing in all the various sessions yesterday. And you may have noticed that there's note takers in all your sessions. So this is where a lot of the commentary is coming from. We've been hearing from all of you and trying to distill it down into some themes. So Nicole just did a great job kind of summing it up for us. Thanks. So my name is Natalie Springle. I'm from the University of Maine Sea Grant Program. I'm based in Bar Harbor, Maine, in the heart of Acadia National Park. I've been involved in working waterfront issues in Maine for about 10 years and have been actively involved in this national network for a long time as well. And my role here today is to introduce what the National Working Waterfront Network is. But before I jump into that, coming from Maine, I especially wanted to say thanks to all the West Coast folks for welcoming us here from around the country. It's been an incredible learning experience, I think, from all of us from the East, especially, and the Gulf Coast and the Great Lakes, to come and learn about working waterfront issues out here. Lots of similarities, lots of differences, too. So that is, in fact, sort of the value of a network. It's about increasing understanding, finding common ground, and sharing solutions around the country. So we've heard a lot about this network notion. And what is it? What is the National Working Waterfront Network? Well, the first sort of thing to really think about when you ask the question, what is the National Working Waterfront Network, is that it's all of us in this room. It's everyone who is involved in working waterfront issues around the nation and who have been sort of active in the last bunch of years or getting active on the issue just starting today. So it's every one of us. Good, that works. So why a network? Well, it gives us a chance to find common ground between all the various uses, between all the different managers, the policy people, the people who make a living on the waterfront. It's a chance for sharing common ground between all of these different uses. It gives us a chance to explore how we impact each other. For example, how do competing uses on the waterfront impact one another? We have various uses in this room. Sometimes those uses are compatible, sometimes they're not. So having a network gives us a chance to actually explore those issues and find solutions to them. A network enables us to share stories. Nicole talked a lot about story this morning and the narrative of what's happening in our working waterfronts. A network helps us put the human face to the issues around the nation. Helps us strategize, helps us identify trends that we might otherwise have missed. How did we get to this network notion? Well, we know at this point that this is the third national symposium on working waterfronts and waterways. Let's see a show of hands. Who attended the Norfolk Symposium, the first working waterfront symposium in 2007? Great. I think I'm seeing about 15, 20 hands. That's great. So I think for those who attended that symposium and were involved in the mid-2000s in this whole issue, as well as all of us in the room, we might recall that at the time, the major issue that we were talking about was sort of this waterfront land rush and the ensuing conversion of waterfront property to non-compatible uses. It was happening to marinas, to wharves, to a whole suite of different waterfront uses. So the symposium, coordinated by Virginia Sea Grant, Boat US, National Marine Manufacturers Association, many other organizations along the way, really kicked off this national discussion between various user groups and recognized that challenges were widespread and equally impacting both recreational and commercial waterfront users. And I think that was a really significant finding of that first symposium, was that working waterfront changes and challenges were impacting a whole suite of different users, not one particular sector, but recreational users, commercial, large, small, sort of the issues were very widespread. And there was common ground between all of them. At the same time, in the mid-2000s, the National Sea Grant Network produced the first sort of national survey of working waterfront issues and coastal access around the nation. I think that there are some of those reports on the main Sea Grant table that you're welcome to pick up if you want to sort of go back in history and look at what was going on in the mid-2000s and how that was consolidated as a national report. So it was clear in the mid-2000s that a coordinated effort should be made to address working waterfronts around the nation. And Virginia Sea Grant continued to serve as a hub for sharing information through an informal network of people interested in working waterfront. And it was also clear that the group wanted to gather again and sort of grow the conversation. So in 2010, as you've heard by now, many of us met in Portland, Maine for the second symposium, the other Portland. And let's do the show of hands things again. Who was at the Portland, Maine symposium? Great, looks like about 20 people as well. I'm going to do one last show of hands. Who's been to all three? Great, that's great. So there's our institutional knowledge keepers there. So by 2010, so we hosted the event in Maine. And again, with lots of different supporters, many folks in this room. And by then, it was clear that a tremendous amount of work around the nation had been done to protect working waterfronts. By then, we all knew there was a problem. We didn't sort of have to kind of figure out, well, what's the problem? We knew that there were problems and challenges around the country. And it was time to start sharing solutions, time to start sharing success stories, because enough success stories were coming to the fore of how you can actually address some of these working waterfront challenges. At the Maine symposium, Shelley Pingree, who is a congresswoman from Maine, was then, still is today. She's the one in Congress who's introduced the Keep America's Waterfronts Working Act. She called on participants, she formally called on participants to formalize this network so that she and her colleagues on the Hill had somewhere to turn when they needed fodder to craft policy, and so that they could have support when it was needed, and to formalize all of this work that had been happening into one entity so that it would have more impact, both at the local level as well as on Capitol Hill. I think I keep forgetting my slides. So the National Working Waterfront Network was officially born. So the time had come to step it up. In the strategy session on the final morning of the Portland Symposium, much like we collectively will have a strategy session tomorrow morning to craft the future direction of the Working Waterfront Network, that first strategy session in Portland was all about identifying what are the priorities for this new sort of formalized network. And here are some of the priorities that were developed on that final morning. I'm not going to read them to you, but suffice it to say that the participants basically rose to the occasion, and a group of volunteers sort of emerged to kind of take it to the next level and to take these ideas and start distilling them into action. So the network has become about supporting local and regional efforts, recognizing that working waterfronts are unique and place-based, and we each work and reside in working waterfronts that are potentially vastly different from each other, but that there's common ground in some of the challenges that we face, and that the network is about working together to create synergistic solutions. It's about cross-fertilization and supporting what we all do in our various communities. And to quote somebody on the steering committee, it's about believing that conversion of working waterfront to non-compatible uses is not inevitable. It's about sharing tools and strategies to protect working waterfront. So there's a huge amount of expertise in this room, and we've all been learning from each other already for the last 24 hours. There's common experiences, there's varied approaches. The Working Waterfront Network is a forum. We are a forum for raising awareness of working waterfronts as a national issue, and identifying commonalities among our various regions and common issues of concern, and sharing success stories and tools. So for any sort of initiative to become effective, there needs to be some sort of a structure. So there is a steering committee, and now I'm going to do the stand-up thing. Anyone who is on the founding steering committee of the National Working Waterfront Network, just kind of stand up and raise your hand so people can start putting faces, including you guys here. So I think there's 18 of us, I believe. These are the people who, over the last few years, have done a whole lot of sort of conference calls and emails to kind of try to put form and function together to get the network moving forward. So the steering committee essentially kind of moves it all forward, as I said. There's a 5-member executive committee that leads the work of the steering committee and kind of the day-to-day functioning. And there are, just like any other sort of formalized function, there's a series of subcommittees. And there's the opportunity for anyone in this room who wants to become involved in any of this structure to do so. There's all sorts of processes. So we invite you all to become involved. These are the organizations that the Founding Steering Committee currently represents. And the first major project of the network is what we're going to hear about this morning, other than planning symposiums, which have been a pretty substantial undertaking. But because we, as a network, had sort of started developing a more formalized structure to work together as a cohesive team, we were able to start responding to some of the needs and priorities that were identified in Portland and in Norfolk. And so one of the opportunities that emerged was a request for proposals from the Economic Development Agency to address some major working waterfront questions around the nation. And that's what we're going to hear about this morning. So because of this sort of without the network, sort of formalized structure, we probably would not have been able to do this project that you're going to hear about in a few minutes. I'll let the panelists who are coming up kind of give you the nuts and bolts, but suffice it to say that the work that this panel is going to present to you was in direct response to the priorities that were identified in Portland in 2010. And so I'll let them tell you a little bit more about the research that they've done on the drivers of change and on the economic impacts of working waterfront around the nation, an effort to consolidate a lot of that data from around the country, kind of some groundbreaking work that hadn't been done yet, and creating a comprehensive clearinghouse of information and tools that you'll hear about, all of which, again, was identified by this body in 2010 and carried over from 2007. So I think I want to sort of wrap it up and start passing it on to the next folks, just with a couple of final comments. Don't know why that jumped. What remains the most important for the National Working Waterfront Network, for all of us, is to be nimble to the needs of the people who need access to the water to make a living, and to communities for whom the working waterfront is central to their economy and to their culture. So the network needs to be resilient to tackle the emerging issues. The primary concerns of 10 years ago might have been the displacement of traditional waterfront uses such as marinas, slips, piers, et cetera, by higher value residential and commercial uses and affiliated loss of maritime heritage. That was really hot 10 years ago. It's still an issue, but things are kind of changing too. In the wake of the recession, as the rush on waterfront land has maybe a little bit waned, other waterfront challenges are emerging. Nicole referred to a few of them. Sea level rise, increased coastal storm activity and storm surges. We heard about this stuff yesterday morning. Hurricane Sandy, these kinds of events. Shifting markets for waterfront industries. How will the widening of the Panama Canal affect working waterfronts? How about the opening of the Northwest Passage due to the melting polar ice caps? These are sort of some of the big global trends that we're seeing that are having a very direct impact in our own backyards. So we can't predict today what will be the topics at the next symposium. Can't really predict where the next symposium will be either, but that's a different topic. But we know that the conversations that we have at this symposium will drive the direction of this network and this network's priorities. The need for this national network was first identified in 2007. In 2010, the participants at that symposium formalized this network. So now in 2013, the network is a functioning entity. We're all here. We're all in this room. So the network is yours. Use it. Share examples, tools, and stories from all parts of the country. And we're going to hear about a simple way to do all that sharing online and in future symposiums. And we invite you to come participate in tomorrow's National Working Waterfront Strategy session and help set the course for our shared National Working Waterfront Network. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it on to Nick Battista, who is the Marine Program Director at the Island Institute in Maine, and he's going to set us up for the panel.
Thank you, Natalie. Incredibly excited to be up here presenting the tools from the EDA project, and would really like to thank the project team for all of your hard work on this, for the EDA, for the funding, and the supporting organizations that we work for that provided a lot of support in match for the project. Beyond the folks sitting on the stage here, there are a number of people in the audience who were incredibly helpful in the project, whether you wrote case studies or were a project advisor or work at one of the institutions involved in the project. Love if you could all stand up and be recognized, and just so everybody knows who is involved. So if you wrote a case study or were a project advisor, Caitlin. Thank you. I also want to thank Natalie Springle and Stephanie Trollwater-Otts. They provided a bunch of leadership on the project and were incredibly helpful in coordinating, and we wouldn't be here without the work that you guys did. So again, it's very exciting. So hopefully the tools that you'll hear about and the information that's presented will help you and your colleagues as you work on working waterfront issues. Ooh. Don't want to hit that chord there. As you listen to the presentations today, think about how you can use the tools and the materials that we have developed here. Maybe the historic trends report places what's happening in your community in context of what's going on elsewhere in the country. The economic report might provide you some information at a pretty fine level that you can take and say this is how we fit into a larger regional context or in the context of our state. On the policy side of things, maybe you're struggling with what's the right definition of working waterfronts for your community. There's a whole bunch of information in the report on that. There's a large number of financing tools that have been collected, and it's a searchable database. You know, if you're looking for money for your project, that's a great place to go. Finally, there's a bunch of case studies that show how these tools have been implemented and how these tools can be used. The working waterfronts, as you know, are a messy, complex place, and the tools don't operate independently of each other. They come together in many different combinations, so learning from what other communities have done is incredibly helpful. This information is all presented on a website and more. There is this report here. This is the collected information. It's a series of PDFs. There's a bunch more information on the website that's not in here. You have the executive summary of the report on your table with key findings and recommendations, providing some ideas of where, after 18 months of digging in deep to working waterfront issues around the country, we think things should go. So with that, I encourage you to go and check out the website after this, read the executive summary, read the full report if you're interested, and turn it over to the project team. Just like to note that there's notes on there's cards on the table for questions. Please write down your questions as we go, and we'll take them at the end if there's time. And I just asked the project team to introduce yourselves too. So thank you.
That'd be good. Now, where are we on this? Keep going. Ta-da. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jack Wiggin. I'm the director of the Urban Harbors Institute at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And the Urban Harbors Institute was responsible for one part of this project, which focused on industry status, trends, drivers of change, and that kind of thing. So in a sense, we were doing a lot of the background work for the project. I should say, too, that you're probably looking up here, and there's a whole pile of us up here, and you go, how long are these people going to be talking? We're all committed to just a handful of minutes each, so we'll get through it. So what you're going to hear, I think, from each one of us is just sort of an overview of each of the elements or components of this project. And as Nick said, all of the material is available to you on the website, and that would be where you would go to get the details. Working on this project with me at UHI was Allison Novelli and Dan Helene, who are up front at this table. Dan is since then has migrated to the West Coast, so you're lucky to have him here now. Also, Kristen Udewick on my staff was also participating in it. We did several things for the project. The first was to research the history of working waterfronts going back to the beginning. We looked at the evolution of waterfront development and the uses that have changed over time, and those changes often have had to do with technological advances. We prepared a description and status of the industries and the activities that occupy working waterfronts. We reviewed the current and projected trends of waterfront industries. And the purpose, I think, again, of doing this is to provide a long view of this topic area in order for people who are engaged in working waterfront matters to build in their communities, based on this kind of material, an appreciation for what's going on those waterfronts today, because what's going on there today is a product of what has happened in the past. The next piece we worked on was historical overview, and I won't talk about that very much, but the native peoples of the country, of course, were the first users of the waterfronts, and there's ample evidence in the oral tradition and in archaeological evidence that they took great advantage of working waterfronts, whether it was the coastal oceans or rivers and so forth. They were occupying those areas. The country that we know today, the pattern of development we know today, really is a result of the European settlement of the United States, where the European countries came, settled on the East Coast, began to build up communities on the East Coast, which were really mercantile outposts for Europe. I mean, what was happening at that time was the Europeans were using the natural resources in the United States to be fed back into those countries, and in return there were goods exchanged with us. So the cities that we see on our coastal lines today are really a product of what happened a very long time ago. West Coast is a similar kind of situation, whereas it was the Spanish that were settling the West Coast, and oftentimes having to do with Spanish missionaries and so forth. In more recent years, it's trade with China that has made the port cities on the West Coast important. The Gulf, of course, it was the port for the heartland of the United States, where the products that were grown in the middle of the country reached other markets, also became very important for oil and gas exploration and production in later years. And we can't forget the rivers, the navigable rivers throughout the country either, because they've been an important part of the history of working waterfronts. Probably the most important piece that we worked on was the drivers of change. Why have these waterfronts evolved over time, both in history, in the present time, and in projections for what these changes will be in the future? We cataloged the drivers of change that we could identify. They fell into categories of demographics, economic, technological, regulatory, environmental, and then, as Natalie mentioned, climate change is going to probably become a big driver. Up on the slide should be a map of the population density of the United States. This was done from 2011 census estimates. We compiled data from the 2010 census based on the 444 coastal counties that contain these working waterfronts that we talked about, and The Economist identified those 444 counties and came up with just a little over 47% of the population in the United States live in those 444 counties. Now that's a smaller percentage than you'll often hear NOAA say, for example, but that's because of the selection of the counties that were used there. Nevertheless, it's a large percentage of the population of the United States. It's disproportionately large compared to the area of the country, both in terms of population, social importance, and economic importance. The percentage increase in coastal counties have always exceeded the growth in non-coastal counties and the country as a whole. And interestingly, the population densities that we're talking about don't even reflect the seasonal variations that occur. And most of you know that the population in these coastal counties in many places in the country is quite an issue. The intense population density in these coastal counties, of course, leads to pressure for new kinds of development, and I think everybody's familiar with that. That's not news to anybody in this room. But that increased interest in living near the coast does put pressure on the land that has been traditionally occupied by working waterfronts, and that's been a large part of the cause of the redevelopment of working waterfront properties in the past. That intense pressure to be located, for other uses to be located in these areas, of course, raise the property values, and that in turn makes it more difficult for businesses that might be struggling at various points of time to maintain their occupation of those working waterfronts. Rising coastal property values also means rising property taxes, which puts additional burden on those working waterfront activities. So it's that interest in occupying the coastal area that is probably behind most of the trends that we're talking about here. But there are other things. The cost of dredging, the cost of infrastructure for supporting water-dependent uses is very expensive. Much of the existing infrastructure was put in place a long time ago, and today's working waterfront activities oftentimes depend on that. But the infrastructure deteriorates over time, and there's a need to improve it and maintain it, and those costs are extremely high. Dredging is a particular problem. Everybody on any coast, big port, small port, knows that dredging is a major problem. Part of it has to do with the cost. Part of it has to do with the release of monies from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. Part of it has to do with some environmental regulations that are put in place. I mentioned when I start technological advances, shipbuilding's changed over time. Long-distance passenger travel by ship used to be a popular way of getting around. That was largely displaced by air travel. Ferry service succumbed to automobiles and bridges. The containerization of cargo caused a huge change in the way that ports operate today, and that's probably one of the major changes that trickles down not only through the larger ports, but to the smaller ports as well. I wanted to end by talking a little bit about environmental changes, but I'll end with climate change. Sea level rise, increasing intensity and frequency of storms cause a problem for coastal activities, but also the migration of species is going to change the way working waterfronts are used today from what we see today. So that'll probably be, the good upside of that might be that there'll be less intense pressure from alternative uses if government intervenes or if the marketplace intervenes. But on the other hand, working waterfronts are going to have to adapt to that change as well. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Bob Swett. I lead the Florida Sea Grant Boating and Waterway Planning Program, which is based at the University of Florida. For this project, the status of the ocean-related economic activity in 2009 was evaluated for the 11 coastal regions you see here on this map, which comprise 444 coastal counties in 30 U.S. states, including the Great Lakes states. The analysis were conducted by Dr. Alan Hodges, who's the director for the Economic Impact Analysis Program at the University of Florida, and his colleagues. The National Ocean Economics Program at the Center for the Blue Economy at the Monterey Institute of International Studies in California was the primary source of the data that was used in the analyses. And this morning I'm just going to give a brief overview of some of the results, and as we've heard, the full results are available on the project website, the Clearinghouse. The U.S. ocean economy is defined as industries or activities that rely directly on the ocean or Great Lakes in counties that are adjacent to the coast or in coastal zones as defined by the U.S. Coastal Zone Management Act. Ocean-dependent economic data are available for 6 major industry groups and include the marine living resources sector and some of the activities of the sector. There are many more are portrayed here on this particular slide. The second major group is the marine transportation sector, which includes many activities, and one of the major ones, as we just heard, was containerization or container shipping. The third is the ship and boat building and repair sector. The fourth is the offshore mineral sector. The fifth major one is the coastal and marine tourism sector. And the sixth, which I don't have a slide for today, is the marine construction sector. Nationally, the ocean-related economic activity in 2009 accounted for nearly 131,000 businesses with about 2.4 million full and part-time jobs, 84 billion in wages and benefits related to those jobs, $217 billion in gross domestic product, and that total amount accounts for about 3.4%, or accounted for in 2009, 3.4% of the total gross domestic product, and nearly 5% of total employment. When accounting for multiplier effects, or what we call the ripple effects, economic contributions of ocean-related activities amounted to about 6.8 million full and part-time jobs, $284 billion in wages and benefits, $645 billion in gross domestic product, and that's about 2.8 to 3.4 times the direct effects due to that first-round spending alone. So as that dollar circulates through the economy, generates more effects. Nationally, ocean economy wages in 2009 averaged around $35,000 per job, but obviously there are variations regionally. Note, for example, here in the Gulf of Mexico, while 9.9% of the national employment was in this particular region, we see that it accounted for 23.7% of the wages. So obviously we see that on average, the wages in this particular region are much higher than they are in other regions of the country, and this is primarily due to the offshore mineral extraction sector, oil and gas and so forth. Furthermore, we see that this region accounted for nearly 40% of the gross domestic product as well. Here in the Pacific Northwest, when we look at the relative distribution of employment, wages, and gross domestic product, we see it's relatively more balanced than, say, the Gulf of Mexico West. In addition to understanding the current status of the ocean economy, it's important for communities to have an idea of future prospects for their working waterfronts for planning purposes. To that end, the top 50 counties were identified that have the greatest predicted negative and positive growth, or change rather, in GDP of an ocean economy sector between now and 2020. The table here shows a subset of those 50 counties in which, given recent trends, all economic activity is expected to cease within specific ocean sectors by 2020. The GDP values in 2009 for the 50 counties range from $8,000 in Virginia here, Arlington County, to $25 million in the marine construction sector of Middlesex County, Massachusetts. And one thing that's important to note is that though the values seem relatively small in comparison to the overall economy, obviously they are highly significant for those community members who rely on the jobs and wages that they provide, many of which have been in these jobs over many generations, families and so forth. In terms of expected growth in ocean economy sectors is also an important consideration for adequate planning. For the top 50 counties, the GDP of county-level ocean sectors is expected to grow between 114% to 500% by 2020. Here we see two counties in the state of Washington, Mason County, where we're expected to see approximately 170% growth in the living resources sector, and hopefully I pronounced it correctly, Snohomish County, where approximately the same level of growth in their minerals sector. We also looked at several high-profile industries, including trends for the marine cargoes, shipping, between 1997 and 2020, in order to provide some insights of what to expect for the future. For example, we see here in the Pacific Northwest region again that over this particular period there was about a 10% decrease in shipping from Oregon ports, whereas in Washington nearly a 40% increase in marine cargo shipping that occurred. Commercial fishing is an economic activity traditionally associated with working waterfront communities, but its sustainability is threatened in many areas of the U.S., as we know. Total U.S. landings in 2010 were about 4.5 billion pounds with a value of about $2.7 billion, which represents a decrease of 17 and 18% respectively since 1990. Excuse me, let me go back. In the Pacific Northwest, it was the only region that experienced increases in both landed weight and values, 45% and 20% respectively. Just for, when I queried the various sea grant experts throughout the network for possible reasons for these regional trends, Dr. Pete Granger of Washington Sea Grant indicated that one factor here in the Pacific Northwest is that they saw increases in weight and price due to rationalization of the halibut fishery in Alaska. And so once the individual fishing quotas were implemented, more of that fish was brought south to Bellingham and Seattle for processing. So that's one of the factors here in this region. Lastly, we looked at the ocean-going cruise ships, which have become one of the premier venues for coastal tourism recreation. Cruise ships calling at U.S. ports reported a total of 49.1 million passenger nights in 2011. However, this represents nearly a 12% decrease from a total passenger volume of 55.6 million in 2004. Once again, looking here during this eight-year period, the cruise passenger volumes increased for only 3 of the 11 regions, and the Pacific Northwest experienced the greatest relative increase of all of them of about 56.5%. So once again, all of the full results in detail can be found on the project website. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Lisa Lawrence. I'm with Virginia Sea Grant and the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. I worked on the website, and I'm going to share that with you briefly. Let me get us set up here. Okay, this is the wateraccessus.com, and you might recognize that URL as being the one that was originally set up for the first symposium in Norfolk. It provided a house for the conference website, information about the conference. We used it again in Portland this year. Tacoma has done a wonderful website, so they didn't need to use it, but we have turned it into a comprehensive website for the working waterfront information and tools that this EDA project has created, and I'm going to do a very brief tour of the website for you. It has a threefold mission, and that's to provide a home on the internet for the National Working Waterfront Network, to house this EDA project of the Sustainable Working Waterfront Toolkit, and then to provide an online community for working waterfront stakeholders to come together and collaborate. So the first part of the website, the first mission of the website, is the home of the National Working Waterfront Network. And the bulk of that information can be found on the main part of the website. So right here, and I apologize, but I'm going to have to, I'll use the cursor to indicate what part of the website I'm talking about. This is the who, what, why, and how of the network right here on the home page. If you want to stay connected to the network and join the email list, you can do so with this subscribe, unsubscribe box on the left-hand menu bar. And if you want to know more about the network, including the people that you saw introduced as the steering committee and the executive committee, our site tools About Us will take you, under the Site Tools About Us page will take you to that information about the steering committee and ways to access them. If at any point you want to return to the home page of the network website, you click on the logo, and that will always take you back to the home page. And I apologize, there seems to be some sort of tool with their browser that keeps popping up. So I'm going to have to keep closing that. So that just connects you to the network itself. Now, the bulk of the website is this wonderful Sustainable Working Waterfronts Toolkit that Bob and Jack have shared some of their content, and the rest of the presenters will talk about the other content areas. And that really makes up the bulk of this website. You get to that information, and you can see we've got it highlighted here, the Sustainable Working Waterfront Toolkit. Scrolling over the main topic areas of financing, law and policy, economics, tools in action, which is our case studies section. Kristen Grant is going to talk to you more in depth about that, and our historic trends. As you scroll over, you'll see those subtopic areas that contain the information. And each one has a section for resources, and that's a literature review on that content area. So if you want to know where they went to for when they were doing the research for that area, that's where that is located. So, and you'll be able to find your way through the toolkit to see what you want to do, the information you need to find. But there's also another way for users not at this symposium or that are new to working waterfronts. And if they're not sure how to approach the website and to find tools, we have an approach by user type on the left-hand side. You can click on Decision and Policymaker, Waterfront Landowner, and Waterfront User. And that will take them to a page that explains how that user type interacts with working waterfronts, and then suggest topic areas within the site that might help them get started. So now I'm going to take you to the community center, the online community center, and try to go more in depth on that part, because it's probably something that many of you have not used before as an online community center, except for Facebook. How many people here use Facebook? Oh, good, quite a bit. There will be some parts of this that are similar to Facebook, and so hopefully that'll help you become comfortable. But to get to the online community, you can click on Community and go to the Community Center. There we go. This is the front page, the main page that you get to is going to be very similar to your Facebook news feed page. It's going to show the latest activity. On the left-hand side here, it's going to show on the right the members. As you scroll down, you'll see blog posts, recent blog posts, photos, taking a minute to load, and upcoming events. So in order to interact with the Community Center, you must join and become a member. To do that, in the upper right-hand corner is where you can sign up. Now you can either sign up using your email address and creating a password, or you can do so with a Facebook or Google login. And I'm going to sign in so that we can see how to interact with the website. All right, so when you're logged in as a user, when you join, they need to verify. So we have some steps in place to make sure that we're not getting spammed or that people aren't joining that don't need to be there. So when you sign in or start your account, you will then get an email to your email address that you need to click to verify. Once you do that, you'll be asked to create a very short profile and have the opportunity to upload a photo of yourself. I highly recommend uploading a photo. Now that we're all meeting here, it really helps to be able to put that name and face together again, and if not, you will have one of those comment box little balloons as your image, and so a picture would definitely be helpful. Once you submit that very brief profile, you will then be approved by Caitlin at Island Institute, again, to make sure that we're having the right people sign in and become community members. And so that is all very quick process, painless, and then you can begin to interact with the website. To interact with the website, you'll want to use these tabs up here across the top. If you go to Members, My Page, this is also like going to your page in Facebook. You can put a blog post, having a great time at the symposium. I mean, a status update, not a blog post, I apologize. And then you would just share that. I'm not sure what all these windows that are popping up from the Internet Explorer browser, but we'll close those out. So you can post status updates. You can post photos. You can add a text box, make comments on your wall, very similar to Facebook. Up here under Share, I don't know if you can see what I'm highlighting, that's where you can go to start a blog post, start a discussion, create an event, and post your photos. If you're wondering what the difference between a blog post and a discussion, a blog post is a great way to share a story, some information, just something you want to get out to the entire community. People will be able to comment on it, but it's not a great place to have discussions back and forth. The place to do that is under discussions. And if you have something that's applicable to only a small group of the membership, you would want to go to the groups area, join a group, and start a discussion there. So the best way to familiarize yourself with the website is to just join and play around in it, go to different areas. I highly recommend you do it when you get back and continue those conversations that you've started here. It'll be a great way to not only kickstart the online community, but continue those conversations that you've had. So that's been a whirlwind tour of the community center, of the website. If you have more questions about it, please feel free to see me at the afterwards at lunch or events, and we will move on to Stephanie. Okay.
My name is Stephanie Showalter-Otts. I'm the director of the National Sea Grant Law Center. I'm based at the University of Mississippi, an hour south of Memphis, so I often in this group feel like Switzerland because I'm not really in a waterfront. I'm the neutral party between all of the, but we were responsible for the law and policy component of the toolkit, and I want to thank Tara Bowling on my staff, who's a staff attorney that helped, and Tom Ankerson and his students at the University of Florida Conservation Clinic that also helped put together this section. So we really approach this. This is just a first step of trying to pull together some information about what we thought are the existing law and policy tools that communities have with respect to working waterfronts. Except for a few states, Maine and Florida, it's rare to actually have seen legislation or law that addresses working waterfronts, specifically using that language. But that doesn't mean that there hasn't been a lot of activity out there about working waterfront preservation and redevelopment. And so the group initially decided to focus on 6 tools that we thought are being used and could be of use in communities. So the website contains information on coastal management, on the public trust doctrine, land use planning, historic preservation, land conservation and acquisition, tax policy, and also there's some information about state sports legislation as well that I won't talk about much today. But so in those categories then, what we have right now on the website, the toolkit just provides a very, very brief introduction to each law and policy tool. There's links to community examples, either in the case studies that the team produced or to other communities that we knew about. Links to websites and recommended readings for additional information. And then, as Lisa mentioned, there's also a literature review that actually looks at the law and policy academic journals with respect to working waterfronts. So just briefly, why we looked at each of these. So the Coastal Zone Management Act is in there because the federal law requires states to give priority consideration to coastal dependent uses when citing major facilities. And so there's a hook to look at on the state level. And in some states, because of the way the state coastal management programs operate on the local level, about how you're dealing with water dependent uses in the permitting programs. And so it's led by the states operating within the NOAA guidelines, and they do that by giving priority consideration for water dependent uses. The public trust doctrine, I think the public trust doctrine, except maybe in Massachusetts, I think Massachusetts is one of the only states that really looks at the public trust doctrine and how you can use that for water dependent uses and working waterfronts. But the public trust doctrine is a common law doctrine that all of the coastal states have that protects public access to certain resources for trust-related uses. So fishing, navigation, commerce. In some states like New Jersey, it's also recreation. So again, it's a state-level policy, and it can provide the foundation for management policies. Working waterfronts provide access to public trust resources, and they provide public access. And so the public trust doctrine can be used as a tool to help that. Land use planning is probably the one that everyone's familiar with. It's a huge part of how working waterfronts and water dependent uses are protected. It's a mechanism for guiding development. You have your comprehensive planning processes, your zoning ordinances. All of those provide mechanisms through which local governments can address and deal with whatever their working waterfront problems are. And so this is a huge area that we have just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg with for the website. The other two, historic preservation is to, you preserve historic buildings and sites. One of the case studies from Leland, Michigan with Fishtown is a great example of a community that was able to preserve their historic working waterfronts using a variety of strategies, but historic preservation as well. And so that can be done on the landowner level, community groups, and then pursuant to federal, state, and local laws. And so you go through a designation process, and then with that can bring additional financing and other resources through that. And land conservation and acquisition, this is used when in the cases where the best way to preserve the waterfront is to buy it. If for a state or a land trust to purchase it. So you can prevent future development and acquire access rights if you buy the property or buy the development rights. And so governments, again, land trusts are very active in this. And you can do it through you can purchase the whole rights or purchase easements. And so this is one where there are lots of examples, successful examples out there of using this tool to preserve the waterfronts. And finally, tax policy. And yesterday there were a couple of panels on tax policy. You can use tax policy in two ways. You can use it to raise revenue, to do what you want to do, to buy the property or to incentivize, or you can use it to incentivize the desired behavior. You can try to help landowners keep desired uses, try to provide a disincentive for desired uses. And it can be on every level. It can be federal, state, or local government tax policy, and through credits, incentives, and dedicated revenues. Okay, so that was very fast through that. And so one of the pieces of the law and policy that we did is, how do we engage lawyers, practicing lawyers in this initiative? And that's kind of been my role as director of the National Sea Grant Law Center to bring that through there. And one is in-depth analysis of these issues. And so as part of the Toolkit project, we produced 3 reports that looked at particular issues more in depth. And so Tara Bowling and my office, we looked at working waterfronts in the Coastal Zone Management Act, specifically defining water-dependent uses. How do states currently define water-dependent uses? We did an inventory of existing state definitions. So in the report that you can find on the website, we have a spreadsheet that inventories the 30 coastal states and their definitions and the different categories. And so some states have water-dependent, They also have water-related, and they use different terminology to get at those different categories. And so that information there, that's a first step of just inventorying what we have. We didn't have time to get to the next logical step, which are they working? Are those definitions working? So as I mentioned, there's a report on state funding for ports using the state ports legislation and resources for ports, and looking at how smaller ports fit into those legislation that are often for larger ports. And then there's also an analysis of tax increment financing and how that works on the local government level if you're trying to deal with improvements to things that are in the water, like if you want to remove an abandoned vessel or repair a mooring field, and can you use the tax increment financing to do that. So that's one way that we know that by bringing lawyers and both practicing lawyers and those in the academic setting to the network can help. We also know that you can do policy development, implementation assistance. A lot of the tools in the toolkit, if you're going to implement them, you're going to need a lawyer at some point. If you're going to rewrite your tax policy, if you're going to have a landowner agreement or a purchase of development rights, there's going to be lawyers involved. And there are lawyers out there that have been actively working with communities on these issues. And so one piece that we did also was a thought piece for the National Working Waterfront Network about how might you create a working waterfront legal assistance project? Kind of some of it would be pro bono. How do you get communities the access to the legal resources they need to be able to effectively protect their working waterfronts? And so there is another report in the toolkit in the final report that looks at how would you create a working waterfront legal assistance project. And so that's kind of one of the things that we'll be talking about tomorrow at the strategy session, as well as one of those recommendations. That's it for me. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Hugh Copperthwaite. I work for a company in Portland, Maine called Coastal Enterprises, and we're a community development organization and a financial institution. And we've been supporting working waterfronts in the state of Maine for about 36 years. So to look at financing tools across the nation was a good fit for us to see what else is out there. I just want to acknowledge my colleague Dick Kleim here. He was also instrumental in the research for this part of the project. So CEI's role in this project was to inventory financial tools that support working waterfronts and assemble them eventually into this database that is searchable by state and by program. There's a number of ways you can search this database. And so the goal was to just create this central gathering and have it all in one place, with program summaries and direct links to learn more about the different programs. So the way the information is, the way we tackled it, I guess, if you will, is looking at it at the state level, at the federal level, trade associations, and also foundations or philanthropic support. And then the different categories of the actual tools themselves would be grants, loans, loan guarantees, dedicated revenue, and tax incentives. So we did this, and we did it for all 30 coastal states. Just want to say a little word about our methodology. We primarily started by just internet research, working waterfront, see what pops up. And that led us to studies and, examples of what some of the other states have been doing. And just by reading, these studies, you could then trace it back to the funding sources. So that was sort of the first cut at how we approach this. After we reviewed these studies and looked at the different programs, we and felt that we had sort of exhausted our search or our capacity on the internet, we then reached out to folks who worked in the different states and federal agencies and said, you know, here's our list. Does this look complete? Is there anything that shouldn't be here, or what's missing? So it was a sort of informal peer review, if you will, for this database. And inevitably, I'm sure we've missed some things, so my hope is that in the end there can be a way to keep this database updated so people can add to it or make corrections or remove programs that are no longer in use. So I'm just going to show a couple of screenshots of the website. I'm not going to test drive it, but so this is the section where the financing piece is located. It gives you a little bit of information about what I just said about our methodology and how we went about this. And then jumping right into the different ways to search the website. This slide is cropped, but there's basically 4 different drop-down windows you can use. You can only use one at a time, so you can't, you know, build queries within this database. But it's, you know, there's different ways you can approach your search. The first way is simply by state, so just selecting your state and then hit go and see what happens. Or you can select a region of the coast, so Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, Great Lakes. You can see by region if that's really what you want to research. And then the second option is by program type, so a dedicated revenue source. Economic development entities will show up here, grants, loans, loan guarantees. We have the word repository, which is basically if there's a website out there that houses a lot of information that's collected in one place, we have links to those sites. Direct links to states' different home pages. We thought there was some value in that. And then tax incentives and technical assistance, planning assistance. There's a category for that. The third option to search is simply by program name. So if you hear of a program and you just want to try to jump right through it, of course you can do that in Google too, but if you're already on this site, you can do that. Or searching by acronyms, department, names of departments, or keywords. And the last option is you can go right to, you know, searching for specifically for federal programs, philanthropic support, or we have this, it says business collaboration, but really that's sort of the trade associations that may be out there working in this arena. So just as one example, if you, you know, if you search by state, in this example, I just selected Massachusetts. This just gives you sort of an overview of how your results will be displayed. It says at the top, financial tools for Massachusetts, then a link to the state's homepage. Economic development entities are then listed next. Any loan programs, dedicated revenue, and on down the list. So it's a, you know, it's a good way to see what's listed for your state, but it's also a good way to learn about what other states have that could be examples of programs you might consider. Just a little overview on some of our findings when looking at this database. We had or found a total of 526 separate entries into the database, and 60% of those resources we found were state-initiated programs, and that's, you know, that's really where the bulk of the opportunities are. There's some, you know, 15% federal support, 10% are in trade associations, 8% in economic development entities, and 6% in foundations. And then if you look at these 526 entries that we found, just as a factor of, okay, which state are these in, this is how the 30 states stacked up. So, you know, Florida, Oregon, New York are near the top, and Illinois, Georgia, Pennsylvania near the bottom. So, you know, maybe this will create some healthy competition for some of these other states to increase their program opportunities. And then if you look at the programs by region, these 526 entries, roughly 100% of these programs or opportunities are available nationwide, and then it drops down, you know, Pacific Coast is in the lead, Atlantic Seaboard is a close second. So I think, you know, there's clearly some regions of the country have more tools than others, and that's likely you know, a factor of the length of their coastline is certainly going to come into play, the scale of their local economy that's dependent on working waterfronts, and then you have the varying degrees of uses along the waterfront or pressures, and then you know, some states are just more active in securing programs and efforts to support this. So my last slide here, a few final thoughts. There were, you know, the title of this slide, maybe it's a little harsh, I don't want to pick on anyone, but we didn't find a lot of federal programs, economic development entities, or philanthropic, you know, trade associations that have, you know, grant programs that are specifically for working waterfront projects. There are some, but not a lot. And the accessibility of the federal programs that do exist are not, they're often not directly targeting working waterfronts or infrastructure. And, you know, working waterfronts are an allowable use under these programs, but they're not directly targeted. So, you know, perhaps there's some room for the federal government to help us a little more in this area, or at least help us focus a little more in a deliberate way. And the same with the philanthropic community. I think we found 24 organizations that, you know, specifically say working waterfront is a priority, or it's a theme that they work on. And I think more alliances with these trade associations could be beneficial when we're talking at the federal level of more support for working waterfronts. So I guess I just want to thank the EDA for funding this project and letting us keep this on the radar and do this research, and hopefully we can continue. Thanks.
And I'm here to reassure everyone that we are at the tail end. You can see it happening here. We're at the tail end of our long passenger train, and break is right around the corner. So I'm Kristen Grant with Maine Sea Grant, University of Maine Cooperative Extension. Really thrilled to be here with you all today. I'm talking about the, let's see if I can get us there, Tools in Action section of the website, which has been referred to a couple times now as the place where you're going to find the case studies. And before we launch into sort of a very brief introduction to just a couple of them that Steve Atkinson is here from Tacoma to help me cover, I just wanted to thank the awesome group of people that have worked on the case studies, and is really the reason that we have such a bulk of case studies to offer. So I wanted to thank the developers of the case studies, who are, and other than myself, were Tom Ankerson, Mark Breederland, Liz Durfee, Natalie Springle, Suzanne DeStoik, Bob Swett, Kenneth Walker, Jack Wiggin, and we also had advisors including Louis Lawrence, Lisa Lawrence, Jody Thompson, and Caitlin Cleaver. So thank you to all of them. They're the reason that we have the awesome case studies that we do. So you may be asking yourself, why case studies? Or you may not. It seems pretty obvious. We should probably have some case studies. So that's the focus that we used for this section of the website, primarily because across the country, there are models of case studies and of coastal stakeholders working cooperatively to resolve their working waterfront issues. So what we've done is to give all of you access to those. We've captured them in the growing collection of working waterfront case studies that are 21 and growing. And they've been developed to help all of us as members of the National Working Waterfront Network to learn from each other, to learn from our peers, and to gain access to information about what's worked, what hasn't across the country in terms of how the tools have been applied in real-world situations. And as those case studies evolved, we are relating the projects to tools, as you can see, the tools that have evolved on the website. And as we worked through them, we could see that there were themes around particular case studies that seemed to be emerging into best practices. So the relationship that I'm going to pull together for us is just touch on a couple of what we found to be best practices and a couple of case studies to highlight those. So I'm going to talk just very briefly about one of the case studies being the, this is the introduction to the website, actually, and introduce Trinidad Harbor, California, as one of the case studies that was really outstanding. And the tool that Trinidad Harbor is representing is community engagement. And the draft best practice that we're accrediting Trinidad with at this point is building partnerships across sectors to strengthen the links between thriving working waterfronts and thriving communities. So Trinidad Harbor, if you're not familiar with it, and probably most people in this immediate area are, is on the north coast of California. And it's a commercial and recreational fishing center that was very critical to the local economy. And it was centered around a pier that was built in 1946, which was absolutely critical infrastructure for the salmon and recreational boating industry there. And it fell into disrepair, and also that there were economic downturns with those fisheries. So and in addition to the pier and the reliance on the pier and the fishing industry in the local community, there are also amazing kelp beds in the bay, which ultimately meant that the bay itself was designated as an area of special biological significance and a critical coastal area, meaning that the bay was subject to very high water quality standards, and that ultimately the runoff that came from that aged pier was qualified as a hazardous discharge into those critical areas. So what that meant was that ultimately the pier needed to be constructed, but at an exorbitant cost because of the need to meet these high water quality standards. So the goal in that project was to reconstruct the pier to improve water quality and improve the local economy and the other social impacts to that community from the improvements to the pier. So the accomplishments in Trinidad include building partnerships that include both environmental and economic issues jointly. And by having taken that approach, they were able to build broad community support across the owners of the project, of the pier itself, which was the Trinidad Rancheria, the City of Trinidad, Trinidad Bay Watershed Council, a major timber industry landholder, the fishing industry, and the community. And by bringing all those partners to the table to work collaboratively together, they were able to have tremendous fundraising successes. As I said, the cost of this project was massive. And that there was public and private partnerships that came together with private organizations, businesses, local and state and federal government to share costs and secure funding. And ultimately, it resulted in the spring of 2012 in the opening of a new low to no discharge pier. So they had awesome success there. Really excellent project to feature. And as I said, I wanted to share two projects. So the second is Tacoma, Washington, and it seemed a bit presumptuous for me, from Maine, to stand here and tell you about Tacoma, Washington, which is why I've invited Steve Atkinson, who's with the City of Tacoma and the shoreline planner, to talk to us just very, very briefly about Tacoma.
Great. We're doing a little tag team up here today. I'm Stephen Atkinson. I'm a shoreline planner with the City of Tacoma. Very pleased to be here today. And many of you have probably heard at this point a little bit about the Theophos Waterway. And today it's really our downtown waterfront. But it was also, once upon a time, really the center and the heart of industrial activity in the City of Tacoma. And as some of you know, the Transcontinental Railroad ended in Tacoma. The terminus was on the Theophos Waterway. And if you were at the banquet last night at the seaport, then you probably know that the seaport was once part of a mile-long mill building on the Theophos Waterway. And you probably got a chance to see some of the historic structures on the Foss Waterway. In my mind, the Foss Waterway really represents two things. One, it's our grand experiment in mixed use and kind of defining for our community what mixed use means. Often when we say mixed use, people think of a single structure, often presume that means residential and office or residential and commercial. We're really trying to work towards a definition that I think is very inclusive of what a mixed-use community can be on the waterway. The west side of the waterway abuts downtown, has a much more of a downtown development pattern. The east side of the waterway abuts really the heart of today, our port industrial tide flats, and has a land use pattern that is really more reminiscent of that legacy of industrial activity. The Theophos Waterway was also, I think, an incubator. I think this is getting towards the best practice that I wanted to highlight. It's also, I think, an incubator for practices, ideas, strategies that we really originated on the Foss Waterway, and now we're looking at how we can use those and apply those in other parts of our city and other parts of our shoreline. And so as many of you know, in the 1990s, really the city had been planning for 20 or 30 years to redevelop, reclaim the Foss Waterway as a real significant community asset. That opportunity didn't come along until the 1990s when the west side of the waterway was really languishing. Industry had left the west side and relocated to the tide flats. And the city took on the direct role of acquiring 26 acres of property on the west side and then assuming the responsibility to perform the Superfund cleanup that was necessary in the waterway. And as part of that, I think one of the practices that we originated was to negotiate with EPA and all the different partnering agencies. Once the waterway was cleaned, to do a site-by-site cleanup of the upland parcels, and that really enabled us to start to assemble those properties into 12 development sites, to perform the cleanup on an individual basis, and then get those properties back into use and private activity, and to start to bring the public down to the waterfront. Some of the other strategies that we've utilized that we're now looking at applying to the other parts of our city and our shoreline, really comprehensive public access planning. And rather than a really strict site-by-site public access requirement or public access approach that for our private partners creates a lot of uncertainty in their permitting process. So we're trying to provide as much certainty as we can and predictability through comprehensive public access planning. Second, through the use of design guidelines so that we can provide more proactive guidance. Typically in our permitting processes in the past, someone comes to us and we say, you show us and you tell us how you're going to meet all of our objectives. And so what we're developing now are design guideline tools that we can provide to permit applicants to say, okay, here's how we think you can balance environmental restoration, our environmental goals, surface water, a mediation of public and private spaces where public access is located, and here's how you can protect your businesses through safe and secure public access. So all of those practices really started for us on the Foss Waterway. And now we're looking at saying, okay, it's been really effective, we can improve that, and now we can start to think about how we can use that elsewhere. And so, again, it's been a real incubator, I think, for us, and a learning experience. And I think our final, thing that I would share that I think is a tool that we have to use and that I think this forum is really important for is that self-reflection, continuous learning is also a very important part of this toolkit. Not becoming path-dependent, locked into only one way forward, but periodically evaluating what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and whether it's still the right way to proceed. And I think the Foss is also an example of how we've had to make changes over time in how we're working to ensure that we can create a mixed-use waterfront that is both inclusive of the kinds of residential living experiences and also the industrial activities, water-dependent activities, and public access that we really desire. So thank you very much.
Since I'm about 3 feet shorter than Steve is, we'll adjust that down. So just to wrap up and link back to our tools, the tool that Theophos represents is planning, and the best practice is understand how working waterfront issues are intrinsically connected to other community issues, social, economic, and environmental, and plan approaches that create synergies to meet multiple goals. Okay. Sorry. And just to do a very brief sort of summary of the kinds of features that you'll find on any one of the case studies. As I said, there's 21 and counting at this point, and if you have an idea for a community that you'd like to see a case study done for, please contact the network. And you'll see that all the regions are represented by several case studies at this point, and they list working waterfront issues, tools, and uses. There's a slideshow of locally derived photos. There's a brief summary so that you can scroll through them pretty quickly and get a sense of if you want to read the entire case study. There's information on transferability, whether or not the information provided in the case study is readily usable by any other state, any other community. There's this summary that I talked about of best practices, sort of highlights of things that you might want to consider if you're looking to do a project like this. There's a full project description, which is limited to 3 pages. There's a list of key partners, contacts, additional information, and you can print any one of the case studies. So as I said, invitation's wide open. The collection will continue to grow, and please let us know if you'd like to have your community become our next case study. Thank you.
Get me again. I got the task of kind of wrapping everything up. I'm pretty sure my slides aren't going to work. Yeah, because I messed with the color. So, but so the question was for the project team and the members of the steering committee and the network were, okay, we've done all of this work. We pulled all of this information together. So where do we go from here? And so on the table, the executive summary includes the key findings and recommendations from the project team. We could have written pages on our findings and recommendations. What we decided to do, though, that I think is relevant just to give you some context, is each of the recommendations falls into one of 3 categories, what we thought about policy categories. So what recommendations would we have for policy? For instance, we've come a long way with the definition of what working waterfronts is for us, for this group, and it's evolving, and we're continuing to involve that discussion, especially the large and small working waterfront scale, but we don't have a consensus definition on the federal or state level about what working waterfronts are. And so that lack of the definition makes it hard to design protection strategies and policies because we don't really know what we're trying to collectively protect. And so that's one of the recommendations. We have recommendations on the research side. There is so much more information that we need to know, research that needs to be done to continue the question of the economic research. I mean, one thing, there's a lot of information out there about the economic impact of ports. And it's easy to find are the large sectors like Bob was talking about, but it's really hard to know what the economic impact of a boat ramp is, or a marina that provides access for a couple of commercial fishermen, and it's a completely different scale. And so we need to develop tools and information for how we can value that, not only the economic value, but also the cultural value, and the place of that marina and that waterfront in the community. And so there's a lot of social and cultural and economic research to be done. And then we have recommendations for the network. One thing that we knew going into the project and why we were looking at case studies is there's creative solutions abound. And we need to share them, and we need better access to those models and to those recommendations. And so the website is the first step to that. The community center, we hope it will begin discussion about these, information. Another one of the recommendations is we think that there's a lot to be learned from other movements to protect working lands, to protect farmland, to protect working forests, privately owned small forests. And those movements have the same type of tension that Working Waterfronts does between large industrial activities and small scale activities as well. So the agricultural community and the farmland preservation movement has the same problem with large agricultural, industrial agricultural, and small family farms. And so I think that we think that there's a lot to be learned by looking at working with those groups, looking to their movements, see what they do, conservation easements, those type of activities. And so we encourage you to read through the executive summary, read through our findings and recommendations, start thinking about it, and we really hope that you'll join us tomorrow morning to talk more about those recommendations and what some strategies might be as the network moves forward. And I want to thank everyone on behalf of the project team for listening to our official launch of our findings. It was a great honor to be part of this project, and I want to thank the EDA again for funding it and allowing us to kind of take the next big step. So thanks. I don't know, Nicole, questions?
So that's the project. There are cards with the URL for the website. They're available on the National Working Waterfront Network table out by the registration booth. Now would be a good time to write down your questions if you haven't already written them. I think we have a few minutes, and I think the panel would be happy to answer questions about the project, about the website, about the tools. If you can send the questions up here. You know, what you heard today was a highlight of the information and the work that we did. It's just to whet your appetite and get you excited about looking at the website and the report, and encourage you to do that. We hope that this report is a strong foundation that we can go from here and move on in the strategy session tomorrow. You know, we collected information about what we currently know, and more importantly, where the gaps are, what we need to know. And as the questions are coming up, just wanted to ask the panel a quick question about data gaps. And, you know, Stephanie, Hugh, you both touched on the lack of dedicated programs for working waterfronts, either in policy tools or financing tools. Jack, I think that the historic trends, and Bob and the economic data, we also see that lack of a collected information as a whole. Do you guys want to comment briefly on that while we get questions? And
thank you, Nick. Nick was referring to one of the experiences we had in trying to pull together the importance of working waterfronts was that they vary greatly in size, as you're all well familiar with. And the larger ports, the Port Authority types of ports, the public ports, and so forth, have very good information on the economic impact of what's going on in those ports. So it's very easy to compile information on that scale of port. But a lot of what we're focused on here, and I think that this project was the ports that are just a tier underneath those, and everything down to a real kind of community working waterfront asset. And that's very much more difficult, as Stephanie was saying at the end, to be able to pull that information together. And so I think in one sense, you could do it on a state basis or you can do it on a community basis, but to try to pull together that information to make it meaningful on a larger scale than that proved to be quite difficult. So we'll be happy to hear people's input on that question.
In terms of the economics, I just reiterate what Stephanie had said, that much of the information that we use is collected at the federal level. But even at that level, and it's for counties, but even at that level, you know, there are certain areas where data points may not be made available due to confidentiality reasons. So there may be only a few data points for a particular geographic area or entity, if you will, and so that creates some problems. So as Jack alluded to, we're trying to really get down to a much more local level, and so even at that level, collecting data is very difficult. So I'd say one of the things that we hope to be able to look at is can we take information and not have to spend a lot of money going out there collecting more information, but use what exists to be able to interpolate or extrapolate to the local level as well. So that's one tool that could become available.
So we have a couple of questions. The first sort of is a logistical question. How do we maintain the website? What's going forward? How do we keep this project going and do updates? And for that, I'd like to ask Natalie and Stephanie, who are the co-chairs of the National Working Waterfront Network, to take a stab at answering that, and maybe Lisa as well on the website stuff.
So the National Working Waterfront Network, that's our new website, and for right now, Virginia Sea Grant and Lisa have graciously said that they'll continue. She's going to continue to maintain the website, and the network will continue to update it to add more information. Like Kristen mentioned, we want to continue to grow the collection of case studies, and so, please contact us, and if you have an idea that you want to write about, we would include it on the website. Our hope is as well that if some of the recommendations with respect to research and information sharing are picked up by the network and by others, that information will begin to be incorporated into the website. So personally, my vision is that the website will continue to grow, the toolkit will continue to grow, and that's kind of dependent on us and what other information begins to be generated and collected as well. So,
I think the only thing that I would add is just to kind of reemphasize the notion that the network is all of us. So we have a founding steering committee which at some point will morph into a next iteration of the steering committee and hopefully involve some of you. The reality check is that the National Working Waterfront Network does not have staff. So we're all staffed by our various organizations. And so we're hoping that the online social networking tool that Lisa presented is a great opportunity for all of us in the room and beyond to share information in a collaborative sort of way so that it doesn't sort of fall on one entity or staff person that doesn't exist. So we're hoping that that will really become a tool for all of us to continue to exchange and update collectively.
Thank you. The next question is, why do we only focus on maintaining existing working waterfronts? Why not look at working waterfront expansion? The very short answer is this was an 18-month project. About $500,000, and we were starting from pretty much ground zero as far as collecting this information, and we did what we could with the time we had, and I think that it's a great question. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk about future working waterfront expansion or anything like that, but the short answer is time and money.
That would be a great discussion to start on the community center and talk about that idea or others that you see as gaps in the existing information that the work groups have put together. That's exactly what that online community center is for, to start those conversations and spin off new projects. We might find funding to add new elements or sections of the website. So keep that in mind and definitely keep these conversations going and questions going on the community center, because that's what it was built for.
Come tomorrow.
Oh, right. And I would add, too, some of it also was a function of the request for proposals from the EDA. They asked specifically for economic analysis of current trends. They asked for the analysis of the historic trends. And so some of it was just a reflection of what the funders wanted. And then, like Nick said, certainly was a reflection of how much other than those things, could we really do, and we really needed to kind of pick one to start with. And yeah, so join us. Yeah.
Rick, you wanted to say something?
From the recreational boating perspective, okay, Nicole mentioned that the EDA is looking at this through the lens of jobs, and I maintain there's another lens we'd be well served to keep in mind, and Stephanie just alluded to it as well, and that's the cultural values. Very near and dear to our president's heart is something called the America's Great Outdoors Initiative, which is the concept of connecting the public to our outdoors, our natural resources, and I can't think of a better place to connect with nature than from a boat. I'm sure everybody in here would agree with that. So as our findings and such goes back to Washington, D.C., there is, as part of this America's Great Outdoors Initiative, there is the Federal Interagency Council on Outdoor Recreation. All this, that's a secretary-level initiative. As we can inject that working waterfronts into that group, too, with that cultural value perspective to working waterfronts, I think we'd all be very well served. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. And I think that leads into the next question that we have, and that's basically how are we, as folks who care about working waterfronts and as the project team and the National Working Waterfront Network, how are we reaching out to other industry groups to get them involved? How are we reaching out to other entities that care about working waterfronts or potentially could care about working waterfronts? Is the National Ocean Council a place for this? Are there other bodies like Rick you mentioned? Could they be good homes for it? And how are we reaching out to the other trade groups and industry groups? Take a quick stab at answering it. We're here, we're talking to you, but really it's the network going forward, the National Working Waterfront Network. If we want to be making these connections, we need you to be involved. We need you to come and participate in the strategy session. Tomorrow we need you to volunteer for a work group. We need you to step up and say it's important. I represent a port. I want to be involved in these conversations. Yeah.
I chaired or moderated the panel on shipyard economics yesterday, but the guys in the shipyards couldn't stick around for a day. They have other things. But they go to their trade shows, their conferences, where the shipyards get together, and the same thing with the fishermen. I don't know if there are any fishermen left in the room, but the people actually, there's a few. But I think, getting the people actually use the waterfront and are working on the working waterfront, and getting them engaged as groups. If there are a community section for shipbuilders on the website and you went to the shipbuilder conference and were able to talk about that, I can talk to a few of them. I don't go to all those conferences, but I don't know the websites. I'm thinking if the network, if there's a way to fund that and get that out and really draw them in at their conferences and talk to them where they are, getting the people working on the waterfront is really going to be critical to the success, and they could use the toolkit.
Great.
If there's any plans for that.
I think that sounds like a great thing to talk about tomorrow. The last question that we have is from a commercial perspective. We talk about ports and shipyards, but should an industrial refinery complex be included in the working waterfront conversation? This gets at an issue of scale. It's something we struggled with a lot on the project. I'm from a small town in coastal Maine. Our working waterfronts are, it's Richard Nelson up here in the front and his lobster boat. That's what we have for working waterfronts. It's not the huge cranes and things like we see out here in Tacoma. We recognize, and particularly through the previous symposiums and other conferences, that scale is an issue and that working waterfronts around the country look different. I think it is a great question. I know we've had a lot of discussion about the issue of scale and what do we mean when we talk about working waterfronts, and just wanted to open it up to the panel to see if anybody wanted to take a stab at adding to this.
Hello. I'll just say, from the economic perspective, we obviously had those 6 major industry groups, and industrial was part of that. And so from that perspective, it's just a matter of presenting that information. That's how the ocean economy is being defined. I think in the strategic session, that's where we decide, which particular sector or sectors, and I think it would be sectors that we'd focus on. But from the economic perspective, that information there is there so that those areas where that sector is important, they can see what it contributes to their local economies. But then those that have other sectors, such as the marine living resources, can see how that sector contributes to theirs. So I think the strategic planning session tomorrow in the future really will define where our focus is.
Nicole?
So I'm not up at the front, but I'm on the committee, and I represent the West Coast. So all of you from the West Coast, I've been your voice on this committee because it was a really interesting conversation, and I have to say that I kind of brought it forward to say we have real differences, but even though, and I've worked for many of you ports and big industrial users as in my past life, I recognize that that is a working waterfront. And also, we do have both large and small on the West Coast. That was the first thing I had to convince the people from the East Coast, is that working waterfronts are both big and small, and our ports are very, very varied in size. And the issues are very similar. So I'm from Seattle area, and right now, I'm going to bring up the elephant in the room, which is we're having some serious discussions about should you place a stadium for sports very near the waterfront and the port. And it has created a major conversation that's brought up this whole issue of the value of the working waterfront, the other economic development issues, and really quite an engagement process in our community. However, what I want to point out is that conversation and all the things that are going on, even though we're talking about a big, major container port and a major sports facility, it really isn't that much different from the conversation in Bar Harbor, Maine, about somebody purchasing a piece of waterfront property and wanting to convert it into a condominium or commercial redevelopment, and then the spin-off effect from that might or might not have implications on the lobster fishermen who have a dock adjacent to that and might potentially lose that property. So that's what I've had to convince everyone, is that it is a scaling issue, but I really see that we have this opportunity to share the conversations across the nation of what we're learning, whether it be large or small, because I think a lot of the ultimate tools are the same.
Thanks, Nicole. In closing here, just wanted to say thank you to the project team. You guys were great and produced a lot of really good information. Looking out across the audience, did you know that working waterfronts contributed 3.4% to the GDP of the country? That's pretty amazing. And we're not collecting the information. We're not looking at working waterfronts as a holistic entity, as a discipline, as something that we talk about. It's something that we all touch on in our jobs, whether it's through fishing or a container port. Maybe we need to start looking at working waterfronts as a whole. So thank you to the project team.